Hello Internet and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We are a channel all about tabletop gaming. Today we're going to be talking about archetypes in Pathfinder Second Edition. What they are, why you might want to take one, and how to pick the right one for your character. What are archetypes and how do they work? Archetypes are an example of the modular design philosophy that Paizo leaned into for second editions of both their Pathfinder and now their Starfinder games, and are a very powerful tool for players, adding variety to class chassis, and for GMs who are looking to include world-building hooks and setting vibes in a mechanical way that their players can engage with. I could do a whole separate video for GMs on why you should, consider using archetypes and ways that you can use them in campaigns, from the standard free archetype variant rule, where everyone sort of has the same archetype to make them feel like a cohesive unit who can all participate in common tropes and themes that are expected in an adventure, all the way up to and including making custom archetypes for characters to really hammer home or organizations or ideas and concepts that exist in a homebrew world. But that's not what this is. This is a video primarily player-focused, helping new players who are just coming to Pathfinder or Starfinder for the first time understand this really, I think, an important core mechanic in the second edition games from Pathfinder and Starfinder. So think of archetypes as something between a subclass and a multiclass, or if you're familiar with older editions of D&D, archetypes are a lot like prestige classes from like 3rd and 3.5. The main difference is that in Pathfinder 2e, you don't replace levels of your class with another class or, with a prestige class. Instead, in Pathfinder, once you pick your base class, that's it. You're locked in. But don't despair. That doesn't mean that you lose out the ability to add features and flavor from other classes and concepts. Instead, you're just exchanging feats instead of entire levels, specifically your class feats that you get at every even level. Most classes in Pathfinder 2e offer a wide range of feats that can be used to customize your character, including options to lean into your subclasses. But when the feats presented to you don't work with your goals, you can start looking at archetypes as an alternative. What's really cool about this is the way second edition does class design, the way that it works is you don't actually need class feats to function in your class and in its expected role. Now, certainly they do help. You can add features or help hone in on a playstyle or specialization, but your base features and subclasses are already providing you all the basic proficiencies and bonuses that the game expects you to have without feats. For example, a rogue who never takes a rogue class feat will still have their subclass racket, still be a great skill monkey that's very sneaky, will still deal full sneak attack damage dice, and can apply debilitations. A cleric who never takes a cleric feat will still have all their spell slots and get them on time, including their very important and very cool divine font at full scaling. They'll get the same number as a cleric who invests fully in cleric. And those are certainly useful and interesting things, but they aren't necessary. They're optional. The nature of the build your own class feat modular system in Pathfinder Second Edition means no feats can be required, or else it just falls apart. So trust the system, trust that you don't need these things for your class to feel like itself and have the abilities and features that the game is expecting you to have to work with your party. They're just very nice, cool things to have that let you customize your character, and archetype feats are just a new way and addition to that. So to take an archetype feat, you have to start with the dedication. The dedication will have certain prerequisites and things like that you have to meet. For example, champion dedication requires both charisma and strength, I believe, unless they changed it in the remaster. I think it's still that, which can be hard to meet, but if you do, you are rewarded with a very nice multiclass class archetype. But once you have that dedication, you really can just start taking feats from it as if they were your class feats interchangeably. So you can dip back into your base class if you like, dip back into your archetype whenever, that exciting feat that, comes up that you were excited to take the archetype for in the first place. But this special training does have a downside. You generally will need to take 3 total archetype feats, including the dedication, before you can qualify for a new archetype. That is, each dedication locks you out of taking another dedication until you've invested more into that archetype. It basically is just there to sort of prevent people from dipping in 20 different things over the course of their career, right? That might seem like a limitation. The reality is that it's a benefit. It helps make sure you don't make a weird, wonky build that doesn't quite work right. There are some exceptions to that. There are some archetypes that specifically call out other archetypes, saying that you don't need to train out of this archetype to take another archetype, as long as you're taking this archetype in particular. So you can have, several archetypes, but keep in mind, the more you have, the more it can start to require you to plan your build very meticulously in order to make sure you're training out of those archetypes in time, meeting all the prerequisites, and things like that. But if you're just using a single archetype to tack on an idea or a concept, you don't really have to worry about that. If you're just doing one archetype, the downside of not being able to take multiple archetypes doesn't apply to you. Now that we know what archetypes are, let's talk about the different types of archetypes. Archetypes come in several distinct flavors. While they all function basically the same, some do have unique quirks that, stand to talk about here. In addition to standard archetypes, which might be based on a profession or membership in an organization, or key off of a physical feature like wings or claws, or all the myriad varieties, and there are over 100 for sure right now. I don't know exactly how many, but more get added all the time. So there are a lot of varieties. But the following archetypes just function a little bit differently, and we'll explain how they're different and what that means. Class archetypes. These are basically just fancy subclasses, but they change something fundamental about your base class chassis. For example, all gunslingers choose a way as their subclass, but the way of the spell slot or the spell shot is a class archetype because it doesn't just add magical flavor, it changes the ability score that determines your class DC. The elemental class archetype, the elemental caster class archetype, I should say, changes the spell list that your character picks its spells from to a custom list that is all about just different energy types, and elements like fire, wind, fire, air, water, that sort of thing. One thing to note is that while you generally cannot take a dedication until second level, there are exceptions, but that's in the weeds, we don't need to get into that. While you can't take a class archetype until second level, they do kick in at first level. So even if you start the game at first level, you just tell your GM, hey, I am taking this as I'm pre-selecting my second level feat, and that way you're getting your class archetype features up front instead of having to wait until level 2. This is a little strange and feels weird. It exists solely so that if your game starts at level 1 and you're going to take a class archetype, your character's build doesn't completely change around at second level when you take that class archetype feat. It's built in, it's part of your class, you have just pre-selected that feat to pay for it. Next, and somewhat similarly but very different, we have multi-class archetypes. Now, multi-class archetypes allow you to poach a few select abilities from another class. This is, like I said at the top, Pathfinder doesn't allow traditional multi-classing the way that you might think of, depending on what game you're coming from. Instead, if you want to poach abilities from another class, you don't change whole levels, you change feats. So, what's distinct and unique about multi-class archetypes as opposed to other archetypes is the depth of options that they come with. Okay, they have a distinct edge in size because you can take any feats from the class that you're poaching up to half your level. So if you're an 8th level barbarian and you have taken feats for, let's say, ranger, you can take up to 4th level ranger feats. And most archetypes do not have half as many feats as most classes. Most archetypes are, between, 6 and maybe 10 or 12 feats. It's enough that you have a couple of options at a few levels, but again, they're assuming that you're just using these to supplement your base class, so they're not always super robust. Some are, there are exceptions, but most are relatively sparse, just giving you what you need to achieve a flavor or a concept, and leaving you room to take class feats if you need to. So with all these feats, even after you account for feats and features that may be restricted from you, like most archetypes don't really give you full subclass features or any subclass features at all. So those multi-class archetypes are going to have some feats that you can't use, but even so, it's still a huge number compared to most archetypes. And for that reason alone, I might recommend GMs to be a little more careful allowing multi-class archetypes, just because they do they make other archetypes kind of pale in comparison. Finally, we have artifact archetypes. That's a hard one to say. Took a couple of takes. We only have a few of these so far, but these are special archetypes tied to an item, usually a rare or unique one that opens up new build space for a character. So far, we have one where you replace your heart with a magical chunk of ice, gaining frosty powers and frosty disposition. Another lets you don a cloak to become a werebear and get lots of cool natural attacks and scent features and stuff. And the most recent one lets you use a shard of a sentient guillotine to cut people's souls, and that's cool. I hope we see a lot more of these. These are the only 3 we have so far, I believe, but hopefully more get added. Otherwise, these function pretty much just like any other archetype. You just have to have that item. Sometimes that item will take up, usually that item will take up an investment slot on your character. The default is 10. There's a feat to get a couple more. But it's a relatively small cost, and considering you get 9 other magic items to play with, but it is worth noting that is the one difference in it and the other archetypes. Now let's talk about choosing an archetype. So how do you pick one? What are the best ones? Well, let me start by saying there will be no ranking of archetypes in this video. There are too many in the first place, and in the second, I earnestly don't think it's particularly useful. Yes, some archetypes are objectively stronger than others. Probably Beastmaster and Medic are still considered to be top tier. And they can make more niche or specialized options feel kind of useless. But if you find yourself in a campaign that complements that niche, that meh archetype suddenly starts to look really good. And I think that's good design space, right? For every broad archetype that works for a large number of characters and applies really compelling abilities, you'll have a ton of, or a few at least, really much more niche ones that are going to live and die by the type of campaign that you're playing in or the specific needs that you're looking to fulfill on your character. So instead, I would suggest you think about how you're going to approach looking for an archetype. There's a few different sort of mindsets on that. The first one is need. Is there a mechanical gap that your class isn't providing or that the party is missing? Is there some playstyle that my base class needs help to realize? Maybe the campaign will feature certain environments or tropes that the party doesn't already have a solution for. For example, if your party is light on healing, you might take the Blessed One archetype, or the Medic archetype, or the Alchemist Multiclass archetype. Which one is best is really going to depend on your base class and how else you've built your character, but all of them could make good secondary healers or even potentially primary healers depending on your base class and the rest of your build. If your party doesn't have a strong social leader or face character, the dandy or celebrity archetype or the rogue multiclass archetype could be excellent ways to take a non-social base class and turn it into someone who turns heads and makes friends. Or maybe your need is more personal and you're just trying to achieve a unique playstyle or concept. A scoundrel rogue with a spellcasting archetype might feel like a more martial magical trickster. Or maybe you think it would be cool if your wizard carried a gun. B, consider specialization. This is when you like an aspect of your character, but the base class doesn't have the right tools to expand or improve it the way that you want to. Some examples of when you might want to specialize further into something your base class already does. Magus is my go-to example for this sort of thing. An inexorable Iron Magus, for example, might grab Mauler Dedication to give them some multi-strikes for when Spell Strike is on cooldown, or when facing an enemy with Reactive Strike, or just because it wants Weapon Specialization, or Critical Specialization. Meanwhile, a Laughing Shadow Magus might like Eldritch Archer as a way to get pseudo spell strikes at range and take advantage of that dexterity score that they already are keeping up high for their more finesse style. And any Magus might like a Wizard Dedication to expand their spellcasting options in a way that plays nicely with the spell book they already use on their base class, giving them more big spell strikes and utility spells to prop up that gishy feel. Alternatively, if you're a War Priest Cleric wanting to lean more into that frontline defender tanky feel, you might take a Champion Multiclass Dedication or the Bastion Dedication. C, story. This is when you want a mechanical representation of being part of an organization like the Firebrands, or to make a roleplay choice or story beat feel more impactful by merging story and mechanics. Or maybe you just want to give your GM a cool plot hook to play with, or maybe your GM is offering you a plot hook to play with. For example, maybe you want religion to be an important part of your character, but you don't want to play a full cleric or a full champion, so instead you pick a base class and take a cleric or champion multiclass archetype. Or maybe your party needs to be able to regularly infiltrate clandestine organizations or pose as wealthy nobles. Suddenly, the vigilante or alter ego might help you blend in and hide amongst your enemy. The main thing you want to look for is synergy and cohesion, right? You want to take your archetype's needs into account and be sure you aren't spreading yourself too thin on ability scores or skill increases. And you want to avoid redundancies. If your class already solves for a problem, let it. Or you may find yourself stuck with repetitive abilities. A barbarian, for example, doesn't need help with melee damage, but might want to add some control options or out-of-combat utility to give them ways to help the party besides just crushing skulls. And an archetype that is only giving them a new way to deal big damage in combat is competing with their basic single strikes, which, you may find just isn't worth it. And this is mostly common sense stuff. Or at least it will become more common sense as you become more familiar with the system. But even if you're new to the system, if an archetype uses a lot of charisma-based skills, like the Bright Lion, for example, it's probably not going to feel as good on a character that dumped charisma as one that put at least a few points into it. You don't need to only pick archetypes that use your key ability score, but it probably should synergize with at least with one of your secondary ability scores, Something that has a point or two in it is ideal. You also want to look out for chassis conflicts. A martial archetype on a caster chassis may struggle to land strikes and start to feel unsatisfying, especially if you dump strength and dex and don't boost your attack with spells. And martial characters who want spells to feel a little gishy might find that similarly it's best to focus on support spells and healing, or buffs and utility spells, or teleports are another good one, because what you find is that your lower spell attacks and DCs just sort of become frustrating when they're regularly failing or enemies are regularly succeeding. The same with summons. If you're not keeping those top level spell slots, which multi-class archetypes, even casters don't get those upper ones. They have a delay and they cap at 8th level instead of 10th rank spells. That means incapacitate spells, not for you, right? Because you just cannot keep them on par with the enemies that you're facing. It means that summon spells, the same thing. You're probably not going to be able to summon in some. Summons are already hard to keep competitive, in terms of, what they're rolling on dice. They're best used as bodies or utility agents. So being even more limited on that is not going to feel very good. Other things are, if your archetype requires a free hand, or the concentrate trait, a barbarian or fighter swinging around a big two-handed sword might find themselves torn between two playstyles that don't overlap. Melee characters who take archetypes that use a lot of manipulate actions, things that, or interact actions, things that might provoke reactions, that's probably not a good idea. Similarly, Bard and Martial, for example, might feel like a good fit because there's thematically a lot of overlap. But the reality is that they're both providing pretty similar bonuses that don't stack. So, you're just getting very diminishing returns because you're solving the same problem twice. And if your base class is already relying on multiple skills or ability scores, like a ranger wanting to stealth and use survival and nature, you probably want an archetype that also uses those skills you're already investing in, or else you might find yourself facing tough choices as you have to drop one of those to keep another skill up because it's what your archetype needs. Finally, if your base class already struggles with action economy, archetypes that add multi-action activities may just exacerbate that, where an archetype with action economy hacks, like a rogue or a dual-weapon warrior, could be just what the doctor ordered. I know I specifically mentioned taking Mauler for meta strikes on a Magus. Magus is kind of a unique case where its big boom attack has a cooldown and may need to be recharged, making it further action economy reliant. So having even 2 action activities on a Magus that you're using just when your spell strike is on cooldown, but you still need to move and you can't recharge it, that can be an exception to that rule. So, Just because I've mentioned one of these rules doesn't mean that it can't work. You know, just like taking a martial dedication on a casting chassis can be bad, but if you invest heavily in strength and dex and take spells that buff, you know, there are ways around these limitations. These are not hard rules telling you you can't do this or shouldn't do this. They're just making you aware of problems that you may need to resolve in order to get the most out of combination. Some of the most fun is finding unique workarounds for these sorts of problems, okay? So, you know, go into Path Builder or whatever your character building app of choice is and play around and, you know, see what kind of weird stuff you come up with. Just make sure you watch those traits and those subordinate actions on things, you know. Don't trip up on those thinking that because you're making an attack roll, you're necessarily making a strike. Not always true. And remember, you don't need to be a min-maxer to want to build a cohesive character. Being effective is not the same as being a munchkin. It's a team game, and being a good teammate means filling your role competently so that your allies don't need to pick up your slack. Unless they all signed up for that sort of thing, can be fun. But if they didn't sign up to be your babysitter, it's probably going to wear thin when you keep failing at doing the things that they were expecting you to be able to do for the group. You know, if you're the stealthy character and you make a lot of noise all the time, that's not a good thing for the party. Unless it's a fun game or comedy game. You know, whatever. Was this helpful? If so, like or subscribe or share our link. Do you have more questions about using archetypes that you want us to cover in another video? Or how do you approach picking them? Have you used the very popular free archetype variant rules? I know my table does almost exclusively. Let us know down in the comments down below, or come join our Discord and talk to us there. We would love to hear from you. That's it, everybody. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.